Hi everyone, good afternoon. We're going to get started very soon with our main event. So for those of us who are sitting in the back, do you want to come migrate forward? Please, please, please. Please, please, please. Thank you. I know it's like taking classes, right? Sitting in the back, it's kind of nice, but for our distinguished guests, I think it would be nice to interact with you a little bit more closely and more intimately. All right. Wonderful, and I'm sure others will join us. We will have some folks in our live stream as well, and this is also going to be recorded. So just in case you haven't done so already, please sign in to let us know that you are here. That would be very helpful to us. There's QR codes in the website on each of the tables. It's also up on the screen up here. All right. After I speak, then I'm going to step off the stage and let you all do your thing. All right. Wonderful. Mike is still mingling. Yes, life. All right. I'm going to just take off my mask here. Guess I'll get started. So good afternoon to our distinguished panelists and moderator. We have here Mike Honda, Donna, Yumori-Kaku, Paul Fong, and also Alice Kawazoe. And of course, thank you for coming, our community members, San Jose State faculty, students, staff, and also administrators. It's exciting to see so many familiar faces. Some I haven't seen your face in over 2 years. And also, welcome to those who are joining us online. So like I said, please scan the QR code that's on your table or displayed on the screen up there so that you can sign in. It's very important for us in terms of the just attendance and evaluative process. So my name's Yvonne Kwan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an assistant professor and program coordinator of Asian American Studies. If there are any students in the audience who are interested in minoring in Asian American Studies and taking really cool classes with our Asian American Studies faculty, please, reach out to me. My email address is right there on the screen. Also come by my office. I'm in Dudley Moorhead Hall 213. I'm happy to help you out there. So I serve as the event organizer for this, the lead PI and county contractor for this important project that seeks to not only recover and reconstruct the contributions of Asian American activist elders, but also place such knowledges and histories at the center of Santa Clara County and the wider Bay Area history. So before we begin our programming today, I want to thank San Jose State Event Services and also catering for making this space and luncheon possible. So maybe a round of applause for them here. Thank you. And, oh, what a faux pas. I forgot to bring my clicker. Christine, can you hand me the clicker? Thank you. There's always something, huh? Thank you. All right, so next I want to thank our collaborators, funders, and sponsors for this event and our larger Asian American Pacific Islander Activist Oral History Project. In particular, I would like to extend a special gratitude to the County of Santa Clara and Supervisor Otto Lee for their support in helping to address anti-Asian racism and honoring the oral histories of our elder activists in our community. Moreover, I would like to thank our contract collaborators, Kathy Robles, Gladys Cabagbag, Rocio Luna, and Maribel Martinez, as well as the San Jose State Research Foundation colleagues, Reed Fry, Amy Zhao, and Luann Chu. I also want to give a shout out to the SJSU Cesar Chavez Community Action Center and Mosaic Cross Cultural Center, especially Diana Victa and Chris Yang for their unconditional support of Asian American Studies and also this event. And of course, thank you, our San Jose State partners. Lastly, I want to recognize the hard work and guidance that has been offered by our Community Action Advisory Committee. Just quickly, they include Paul Fong, Mike Honda, some of our speakers today, Michelle Liu, Vicky Takeda, Annette Lundberg, Angelica Cortez, Edwin Tan, Alice Kawazoe, Jiang Pu, Michael Chang, Connie Young Yu, and Victoria Tung. Now I want to hand it over to our distinguished guests to introduce themselves. Please take it away.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to this inaugural event of the Asian American Pacific Islander Activist Oral History Project. That's a mouthful. It's an acronym that I can't even pronounce. So we have to come up with something a little catchier because AAPI, AOHP doesn't do it. So I know, it sounds like a foreign language, huh? Let's begin with introductions. I'm Alice Kawazoe, and I'll be the moderator of this panel. I'm a semi-retired educator. I taught at middle and high school levels for about 22 years, and then became a high school principal, and then a district office administrator. I've worked in schools and districts in San Jose, New York City, San Francisco, and Oakland, California. And I currently co-teach a course in administrative leadership at Stanford University. So let's just go down the aisle here and hear from our panelists. Mr. Fong.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me? Thank you. My name is Paul Fong. I was born in 1952 in Macau, China. I came over to this country when I was 3 years old with my parents and my older sister and younger brother. And we went to San Mateo in the foothills to join my grandfather, who came over as a paper son in 1937. And he was interned in Angel Island for 2 months, but he was able to get out, and he started a nursery, Chanshire Nursery. We joined the nursery and we grew flowers, and I was a flower grower's son. I worked in the flower growing business until I was about 25 or 30 years old, and sold the nursery after that. But I grew up in the nursery in a traditional Chinese family where the kids worked with the parents and out in the fields, and I used to walk to work and from school, and I used to get stopped all the time and called chink and Jap and all that stuff, and so I experienced racism at a very early age when I just started walking to school, and that's when I first experienced racism. And of course, I've experienced it throughout my life too, and I can talk about it a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Hello, hi. I'm Donna Yumori-Kaku, and I grew up in Southern California, Los Angeles, actually Culver City, but no one knew where Culver City was, so I would just say LA. I'm an only child, and just like Paul, Year of the Dragon, I was born in 1952. A little quick story, the origin of my name, Donna, is not a typical Japanese American name. I was named after my uncle Don, who died in the Korean War. And because I was born on my dad's birthday, he actually named me, because I was born in the county of Los Angeles, L.A. Donna. So, which is a disservice to, if you're familiar with the Japanese language, there's no L sound. So my grandparents could never say my name. It came out Radana. And so I grew up being called Akiko. So Akiko with your family, relatives, and then LaDonna at school. Let's see, I worked at De Anza, I attended San Jose State. Prior to that, I went to a community college. I didn't know what I wanted, so the transfer to San Jose State was actually because you guys had a great occupational therapy program. But that's not the occupation I went into. I wound up with recreation and leisure studies. I picked a field where I thought I wanted to enjoy my job, and money was not the factor. definitely. I wound up in education, but it's been a great experience. I worked at De Anza College in the Office of College Life, Student Activities. I worked with clubs, student government for over 39 years. So make sure as students that you pick a field, a passion, because you're going to spend so much time there. I know that you're tired of school, but 2 weeks vacation is all you get when you work, so make sure you get your health benefits, and we'll talk more as a panel.
My name is Mike Honda. I was born in June 27, 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, about 9-10 months before Executive Order 9066, which a Democratic president put Japanese Americans into concentration camp, American style, because people like ourselves look like the enemy. I was born in Walnut Grove, California, which is just outside of Sacramento, off the Sacramento River. I was really born in Stockton, but I claim Walnut Grove as my birthplace because that's where we lived. And my mom was born here in San Jose in 1916 in a converted home that was a, quote, hospital because they did not allow Japanese to be serviced in the hospitals here in San Jose at that time. My father was born in Walnut Grove also in 1914. Both parents, their parents came over from Kyushu, southern island of Japan, mainly because to earn money here and pay off debts accrued in the businesses they had in Kyushu. One was my mother's side, they had a store, and my father's side, I think it was farming. But they eventually stayed here until the declaration of war and also the issuance of Executive Order 9066. And it was about that time people started to really realize that they were continuous foreigners in a land that didn't allow them to become naturalized citizens, and if you're a natural-born citizen, they didn't recognize that you had any rights that was guaranteed under the Constitution.
Okay, let me begin by providing some context and background for this project. It all started, just a couple of years ago. A small group of us, elderly folks, we just got together, and we've known each other for, anywhere from 20 to 52 years. We were casually chatting about the need to capture the history of AAPI leaders in the county. We understood that history has two aspects. There's factual rendition. You know, this event happened at this time, involved so-and-so, and resulted in this and that, okay? But behind this factual rendition, or maybe under it, there are human beings, and those human beings reveal history in narratives, in story. Hawaiians have a wonderful phrase to talk story. A few human beings talk essay, but most of us talk story. And so we thought, what do we mean by story? Well, when we tell stories, when we tell about what happens in stories, we use phrases like, and then he did, and she regretted, and the child cried, and the car swerved, and the mountain erupted, and we felt, and I realized, and then, and then, and then, and then. So we wanted to capture these elder AAPI advocates talking their stories. And we recognize the urgency of this task because many of them are in their 80s and 90s and 100s. So Vicky Takeda, who has some experience in interviewing, Vicki, where are you? Stand up. Give Vicki a hand. Because she actually started the actual interview process. She teamed up with Mike Honda and a videographer, and they identified, and the first interview was with Yoshuchita, a world-renowned judo coach and teacher and mentor from this university, San Jose State University. I noticed on the campus map that I consulted to get here, there's a Yoshuchita Hall on campus. And then they interviewed Paul Sakamoto. Paul is the first Asian American school superintendent in the United States. He served as superintendent of Mountain View Los Altos School District for an unheard of 15 years. Usually the life of a superintendent is about 5, and Paul served 15. And then after his retirement as superintendent, he owned a nursery and worked as a landscape architect for another 15 years. And then he undertook a third career as an artist, drawing in pen and ink. He draws these really intricate pen and ink drawings that, he sells now. And so as we interviewed folks, we realized that these interviews would be an invaluable resource to history and ethnic studies teachers and students. William Butler Yeats, an Irish poet, wrote, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." And these stories, we hope, have the potential to light many fires. So we started listing people that we needed to interview, most of whom we knew or had some contact with, and most of whom were getting older by the day. So, just about this time when we were launching the interview, in March of 2021, we heard that the County Board of Supervisors approved a proposal by Supervisor Otto Lee to implement an anti-hate community outreach and education campaign in response to the increase in anti-Asian hate crimes and violence. Supervisor Lee attended one of our meetings to learn about our oral history project. After his positive response, Michelle Lee wrote a funding proposal, and with Supervisor Lee championing our work, in May 2021, the County Board of Supervisors generously funded our project. I think Michelle Lee, are you here? Stand up, Michelle. It's your artful crafting of that proposal that got us funded. And San Jose State University became the institutional affiliate, housing the project, with Yvonne Kwan becoming the project lead. I don't know whether she wanted to or not, but it fell on her. And she got up and then she accepted. With Michelle, stand up. Stand up again. Come on, stand up. Show your tattoos. So with this funding, this small group of elderly folks realized, oh my goodness, we actually have to do this thing. Our casual talk had become an important action. Thankfully, we are joined with a much younger group of activists who have the values, insight, energy, and power to lead this educational endeavor to transformational change. And this event is the first step in that transformation. So, welcome. We're going to have, I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and as moderator, I'm supposed to ask questions. And so I came up with these questions, and I shared them with the panelists so that they could conjure up responses. And lo and behold, in their introduction, they actually answered the first question. So much for moderation. Because my first question is, tell us a little bit about your background and your growing up, and they already did that. So let's go on to the next question. You know, as you were growing up, how and when did you become aware of racism or injustice against Asian Americans? I'm not going to call on you, just leap up.
I'll start. This made me do flashbacks, and I thought about when I was growing up. On May 5th, my grandmother, my Obachan, she brought over a special Japanese red bean rice for my dad because it was Boys' Day. So when I went to school that day and the teacher said, "Today is May 5th. Does anyone know what today is?" I raised my hand and I said Boys' Day. Now, that wasn't the answer the teacher was looking for. It was Cinco de Mayo. But as a child, you would hope that the teachers would have said, "Hey, I don't know about that. Can you tell me more?" Right? So that experience made me not want to raise my hand because the answer I had may not be what, you know, the teacher was looking for. So I think that beginning, and I'm sure we've all experienced it. What about when the teachers roll call your name? So here it comes, LaDonna, Aki, you know, right here, you know. So they didn't even get to my last name because I figured, I wish that they had, again, you know, figured it out phonetically. I think today's teachers are a lot more well-trained, maybe in-service training. But, you know, having that experience growing up, also, I hope I'm not taking your responses, but being told that you speak English well, where were you born? And of course, when I said Culver City, California, they would go, what about your parents? Los Angeles, Imperial Valley, California. And then when they said, where are your grandparents? Aha, Japan. So, and of course, they expected me to speak Japanese, and I responded, no, I only had a choice of taking French, Spanish, or Latin. It wasn't until I came to San Jose State that I was actually able to take Japanese. So those were some of my early experiences that I had being, you know, that experience of being different, that you weren't American, but, you know, when I was growing up, I used the term Japanese, then Japanese American. So, and then when I came to San Jose State, I learned to put Asian American together. And now that acronym has changed to a longer term, but anyway, so just share that answer with you.
Thank you, LaDonna. LaDonna and I go way back. We were at San Jose State University together, Asian American Studies. We used to hang out at the barracks. The barracks was the military barrack where Asian American Studies was housed. And we became good friends and activists for life with each other.
Your mic doesn't sound on.
Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Speak on top.
Yeah. How did I become aware of racism and injustice against Asian Americans? Well, at an early age, I mentioned I was called names as I walked through neighborhoods, and that continued on through my teenage years. But in my teenage years, I used to combat racism by becoming a homie in the hood. You know, I just became a regular homie in the hood, and that was a way I would fight racism. By being assertive and being somewhat Chicano, in fact. I was more Chicano than I was Asian American because I wanted to fight, and Chicanos were fighters. I saw them as fighters, so I joined the Chicano group and I identified with them, and I used to fight racism that way. And then I became aware of racism. I was a football player, high school and college football player. And I was the quarterback and captain of the football team. I was the yellow version of a black quarterback in the 1970s. that was reserved for whites only. That position was reserved for whites only. And so, no matter what skill level that I had presented, I was going to get converted to another position. I got converted to running back in college, and I excelled as a running back also in college. And so, I was the yellow version of a black quarterback. That's the way I could describe my sense of identity as well. And so, in my activism, as I continued on with life, I became a teacher, a community college instructor, and I taught in the Intercultural Studies Division at De Anza College. And they ran into the first budget deficit, $11 million budget deficit, that the old boys were shuffling money and the money disappeared. And so the chancellor went after the Intercultural Studies Division, ethnic studies of the college, and they eliminated it to cover the $11 million. That was institutional discrimination against the ethnic studies group of people. And so I quit my job and I ran for the board. I got elected to the board, hired Martha Cantor to reinstate the Intercultural Studies Division at De Anza, and now it's a thriving division at De Anza College. And so that was my fight against institutional racism. So I got into politics mainly because of institutional and structural racism that exists.
Let's go on to Mike, and Mike, tell us about how you first encountered racism against Asian Americans.
Yeah, I'll start with that, and then I'm going to go in a reverse order after that. The first inkling I had was after the war, and we moved from Camp Amachi, which was in southeastern Colorado. It was a camp of 7,000 Japanese Americans and Japanese folks who could not become citizens because of the federal law that denied them the ability to do that. After the war, my father took us to Chicago. I grew up in Southside Chicago from about 4 to the age of 12 and a half. And the first thing I remember as an adult, thinking backwards, is that based upon my conversation with my mother, I realized that I didn't speak English when I got to Chicago because my mom and dad spoke Japanese, and there was no need for speaking English until I got to the playgrounds in Chicago and started to mix in with other students who were English speakers. So reflecting on that, it sort of brought to light that there was a lot of issues growing up in elementary school, grammar school, that I now realize is because of language and acquiring second language. And there was no effort to understand that, nor do I remember anyone trying to structure or restructure their instruction so that a child that was a non-English speaker could take advantage of language that they understood and start learning content in a language that they were supposed to acquire in English. And so structurally or institutionally, you could call that racism or just not understanding that this is something that we need to be cognizant of. And then I knew that a lot of the kids, my friends' kids, my friends' parents used to tell them, go get that Jap, beat his ass. And my friends were reluctantly chasing me around the schoolyard at their parents' urging. And then where it came to a point where I started to really understand something is when I went with my brother to see a movie called The Sands of Iwo Jima, starring John Wayne. And it took me into the movie so much that I sat through that movie 3.5 times. And finally, I was there so long, my father had to come and get us because we were gone from the apartment too long, and he finally found us at the movie theater. And we marched out behind my father towards the light of the entrance to the music of the the Marine March, and we were marching out there with my father. And so during the day, we played war. And my father heard me yell out instructions to my friends, says, we're gonna play war. I'm the good guys and you be the Japs. And then I recited a phrase that I learned from what John Wayne said before they took the hill. He said, we're gonna get those bandy-legged, lemon-colored nips. And my father heard that on the third floor of an apartment that we lived in. He called me up and he said, Michael, come upstairs. I yelled at him and says, I didn't do anything. He said, come upstairs, I have to talk to you about something important. So I went up dutifully, and during that course of discussion, he asked me if I knew what nip meant and Japs meant. And I said, they're the enemies. And he said to me, you know, those are derogatory, bad words used on people like us. And them are fighting words. And so that was the first time I realized that my ethnicity was part of the object of my negativity towards that word, Japs and enemies and things like that I learned in the movies. So I quickly unlearned it, and but started to end up defending myself when I ever heard that term used on me. And it became fighting words, and for a while, all I did was fight every day when I heard that. And I guess the only reason was because it was supposed to hurt me, and it was not polite. And it took a while before I understood that, you know, there's other ways to solve problems like that. But it took a while for me to get past that. So I think as adults, as activists, as people around young people, we have to start understanding that names, terminologies, insults mean something. And a lot of times it can cut in ways that you never see it on the surface, but leave a soul bleeding because someone said an unkind word towards somebody only because they resemble some sort of object of derision and hate. No. But that was my first memory of what it was to be an object of a racist comment.
All three of these stories remind us of the power of language and the power of the tone that you use when you use words directed towards other people. And the reaction of the recipients of that negative language can be, in certain cases, as with two of the people here, is to fight back, you know, to be assertive and to maybe act in negative ways that you wouldn't ordinarily do. The other response is to silence you. Is that you don't want to be in that environment. And so you take it, rather than physically assaulting or physically defending yourself, is to silence you into quiet. And I wonder, you know, what would have happened to Michael if his father hadn't called him and talked to him really seriously about the language that he was repeating, innocently that he was repeating. And his father pointed out to him, not his teacher, but his father pointed out to him the damaging use of language. And I think we have to think about that, you know, as we become educators and as we encounter young people too, about not just the words we use, but the tone we use with folks that can hurt them and wound them in permanent ways, or it can rouse their activism. So how did you folks become activists? Who or what influenced your activism?
I was very lucky. I met some very outstanding mentors and role models. Paul Sakamoto was my principal in my freshman year in high school, and he introduced me to the concept of multiculturalism. And that was early in my years. I was 14 or 15 years old, and I was trying, what's this guy trying to do? You know, he brought all these groups together, and he had us socialize with each other. And he goes, this is the first attempt for you to be equal. And so, you know, he was a great role model and mentor. And then, in the same high school, my junior year, I met Mike Honda. He came out of the Peace Corps, and he thought he was still in the Peace Corps. He's working out in the hood, in the Mexican-American community, and I used to hang out in the hood. And so he came out in the hood, and he bought a six-pack of beer out and to introduce himself to us, and he was very much welcomed. And I've been following him ever since that day that I drank that beer with him. But
Good beer, huh?
it was good beer, of course. Thank you. I was underage too, but
Yeah.
I was a homie in the hood. That's what we did. Okay. And so, you know, I was real lucky to have met him because he's the coolest guy I ever met. And then in college, when I started De Anza College, I met Ed Kawazoe, Alice's brother, older brother. And he actually influenced me quite a bit. He took me to the 3 conceptualized meetings of AAPI with the leaders of AAPI, Paul Sakamoto, Alan Seed, and himself. They conceptualized AAPI between 71 and 72, and he brought me along so I would understand what AAPI is all about. And I understand, I know what AAPI is all about. And so I've been following AAPI for the last 53 years because I know what it's about. And I've been involved with everyone that has been involved with AAPI that's come along, and I have now become a mentor and role model because I had good mentors and role models. And so that's how I got involved with the Asian American movement. But you know, at the same time, in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, I had a great role model, Martin Luther King. He actually introduced the concept of racism to me, and from a distance. And of course, in 1965, the Voting Rights Act eliminated barriers for people of color to vote, and also the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act increased the quota of 20,000 to Asian countries, and that kind of eliminated the discrimination on Asian Americans from immigrating over here. And in 1969, the Third World Strike at San Francisco State created ethnic studies here at San Jose State, and Asian American studies also started the Asian American community, and that's what created me, an Asian American. The labor movement actually created the Asian American movement because the labor movement was a labor movement strategy, Third World Strike. They struck, and they did not go to class, and they borrowed that from the labor movement, and I've been carrying the labor movement with me with the Asian American Studies movement as well, and it's merged. Both have merged as one now because they're all my brothers and sisters in the Asian American movement and the labor movement, and I will represent people from the labor movement and the Asian American movement now because I served as the president of my faculty union, and also I was the past president of the South Bay Labor Council, the governing board for the labor unions in this valley. And so I've taken the Asian American studies concept with the labor movement all the way to the pinnacle, and I'm really pleased about doing that. And so that's how I got involved.
Okay. Paul mentioned AAPI, which is actually a manageable acronym for Asian Americans for Community Involvement. So, Michael, will you just give this group a little background on AAPI and what it was, because you're one of the founders of the organization, for most of the people here who may not know what it is.
Yeah, thank you. AAPI was started by a group of what Paul Sakamoto would have said, middle-class Asian Americans who was dedicated to social activism and change. And there was about 13, 14 of us Connie was one of them. Paul was one of them. There was, and there's a lot of other folks who were part of AAPI's formation that had passed on. And, but it was headed up by an interesting fellow by the name of Dr. Alan Seed, who was a Asian American, Chinese American ethnic psychiatrist. And he sort of was the genesis of the idea that we have to get together and form a group to exert ourselves and have our presence known, not only in the papers, but also in the different levels of local government, schools, school boards, and in the curriculum. And so most of the folks that were around were getting involved in schools and going to school boards and making presentations to school boards and to community colleges. And one of the things that I need to emphasize on Paul is that Paul took on the issue of being present in policy-making positions so that you can address a lot of things that, offend or does not include Asian Americans. And I think that that's really the message for today with some of our participants from San Jose State, is to become active in whatever situation that you find that Asian Americans are lacking. Ask the question, why, and what do you do about it? And without that questioning, nothing happens. And so AAPI became active, really active, and became formalized when Vietnam fell. And the sense that Alan Seed, Paul Sakamoto, and the rest of us had was that we're going to have an onslaught of refugees coming from Southeast Asia, and we are not ready. Our schools are not ready, our social services are not ready, our county, state, and federal government are not ready for the influx of Asians who are coming in as refugees. We knew that some of the issues were going to be really critical because we went through that as immigrants. And we took our collective experiences and we turned that into action. We turned the action into policy and also into establishing a group that would advocate for changes in government and how things are done. And it required us to be able to speak to the issues with clarity, but with also with a lot of logic. And when we did that, we became more and more successful. And AAPI, as a result, became a social advocacy, civil rights group that was speaking on behalf of the immigrants in the area of education and social services. And that's how a lot of us got started in government. And we had some models out there, like there's a Mexican American group called MAXA, and they were very powerful in the community. So there are models out there, but when there's no models, we have to create our own institutions or our own arm of change. And when you see that we're not present in any location of our society, and you believe that we have to be present there, do something. And that's what activism is all about. Inclusion, not exclusion. And I think that this is the things that I would like to see us leave behind in terms of the gnawing, persistent aggravation that you have when you see something lacking that really where we should be present in, whether it's San Jose State, the city, the county, it doesn't matter that we do that. And we have a lot of patterns out there. And I think that ACI today, through the leadership of Michelle, became a multi-million-dollar organization that has great impact and influence in this valley. So it's no accident that we have this grant from the county. Is it $500,000? It sounds like a lot of money, but it isn't. It's enough to get started. But with the $500,000, we had the skills in the background of Michelle, the ideas of Alice and Paul and Alette and other folks to conjure up this idea that if ethnic studies is going to be part of our college curriculum and high school, then we better be involved in making sure that the information in there is going to be accurate. And that's the reason why we're all here to talk about those who have participated in the development of this valley, of this institution. And oh, by the way, Paul Sakamoto was my mentor also, because I went to him to see how we're going to recruit Latinos and Asian Americans from high school into San Jose State's EOP program. And Paul Sakamoto was really kind of outstanding in my head because he was single, male, and he had a great job, and he had a British Racing Green Jaguar, 2-seater. And I said, that's bad, you know. And but without asking, he took me under his wing and made sure that I had my first job at Sunnyvale High School, which got me hooked into folks like Paul and everybody else. So activism is networking and also the idea of people touching other people so that we all benefit and benefit on the promise of this country. It's a promise, it's not a guarantee. You have to fight and work for it. And if you're not included in it, then you have to struggle to get yourself involved in it. And
LaDonna, do you have anything to add about ACI? Because I think you worked with
Right.
ACI.
I feel like a real connection here. You know, I've worked with all of you here on the panel, but I was going to say my awareness became when I took Asian American Studies classes here at San Jose State. Paul and I both have minors. As you heard, Mike Honda was an instructor, and I remember our final being at Asians in Education, and it was at Bamboo 7. It was a bar also, so must have something to do. But anyway, what I was just going to say, it's real important to know our history because, you know, whatever background you come with, definitely we didn't have, you know, I could count the number of Asian students in high school. It was my 10 fingers. You know, your parents want you to get a better education, but they move you out of a community that becomes more white in that sense. And it was a very Jewish community. We actually had Yom Kippur off in that sense. But I was going to say that education that I received from Asian American Studies, the field trips, the speakers, made me more aware of the inequities of how Asian Americans were treated, whether it was the Filipino military who lacked health benefits, the housing, elderly, you know, health care, nutrition programs. Not everyone wants to eat a tuna fish sandwich, right? And, you know, the nutrition value just needs to be readjusted to cultural needs rather than thinking that you can't eat rice, right? It's a carb. You know, bread is a carb. Anyway, we just need to adjust people's, you know, perspective, looking out different lenses and giving people choices. So I was going to say my activism of being in social organizations where you can make change. We did fundraiser dances and we donated the money to Asian American Studies. We had another dance with a real live band back in the day. I was here in 1972, so much older than you guys, but anyway, for even the judo team. So, you know, Coach Uchida was then around then. So I think that, you know, I continued on. We had a program called pride, but it had to do with education. So there was an Asian pride, Black pride, a Chicano pride. So I thought, being optimistic, if we can get to the youth, then they will learn about the history of Asians through our activities, and maybe the image of Asian Americans is not what they see at home because of the lack of experience, the lack of what's on TV or movies, right? Who talks like, oh, I'm going to say a program, The Courtship of Eddie's Father. There was a Japanese housekeeper, and she would say, oh, Mr. Eddie's father, da-da-da-da-da. You know, people could look like you, but they didn't talk like you. So the image that you get is what Hollywood writes. So again, you know, we need to write our own stories. We need to be actively participating. So I'm here between two pillars of people who went to Sacramento and Washington, D.C., but they need the activists that I can provide, that you can provide by volunteering your time, you know, walking door to door, making phone banks. I think for your generation, you're tweeting, you're doing things, Facebook, you know, social media, donating money if you're working because you don't have the time, getting your friends connected. You know, that kind of activism is something that you can participate to let our community leaders know that you are watching what they're doing or what they're not doing, to be those eyes and ears and make noise, right? Even though the anti-Asian hate rallies are not as active, we still need to watch it. There's still stories out there of people being attacked.
You know, even though, you know, we have this large proliferation about our concern about Asian American issues, that concern was really rooted in the work of AAPI. They worked in many areas, in education, political activism, social justice, and now the organization still exists. It's a very thriving organization here in the county, and they've kind of shifted their emphasis away from that broad-based involvement to more social and mental health adjustment issues. And they're, you know, one of the leading agencies to provide those kind of services for Asian American families and elders and children. But it's a kind of slight shift. And I don't want you to think that in the early days of AAPI, all of the work was glamorous and activists, and we were, you know, out there burning down things. We were to some extent, because we were raising awareness of people, raising the awareness and consciousness of folks about issues that they may not have allowed to surface. But we also did really tedious things. You know, we wanted to look at the history books that were being used in high schools throughout California. And in order to do that, we had to take all of the history books that were taught in high schools, and we went through, little committees of us would meet at people's houses and make notations of all the racist references in these history books. And it took hours and days of this kind of tedious accountant-like work, you know, like taking these notes and referencing to the pages in the book, and oh, golly. But we gave all of that information to the California Department of Education, and it changed the way they adopted textbooks. So that tedious work, not glamorous at all, did have a payoff and did eventually, you know, change the way textbooks were being considered for use in high schools, and made them aware that it didn't erase all the racist references, but at least it lessened them, and it took the issue and raised it to people's consciousness that this is something that we have to be vigilant about, because the textbook companies are really out just to get money. They're not really out to present an accurate view of history. And in order to get money, they may in fact create some false pictures of what history is. So we had to, in that tedious way, help correct those false pictures. So, you know, if you're interested in AAPI, you know, you just can, you know, look it up and see what they're doing and see what kind of work they're doing. But everybody on this panel really had their roots in that kind of broad-based work of AAPI and their initial attempts to become real advocates. Let's move to this. Well, you've kind of done the next question, but let's see if you have more to say. What are some of the Asian American issues or movements that you were involved in? And what prompted your involvement?
I'll start. I think that early on, my mom was involved with the Japanese American Citizens League, so there was more of a Japanese emphasis. So she would take me to, in particular, protests when a white male actor was being portrayed in an Asian character. So it started early on. My Asian American experience, as I mentioned, was here at San Jose State. Becoming aware. I remember the program Asian American Studies, the funding, you know, the college president not looking to help be supportive, that we actually marched to the office and stormed the office, I'll just say. So those kind of gatherings, you know, was the beginning of, you know, that you're not just one person, there are other people that think like you, that gather, and also that networking, working with community organizations that started to come up, you know, because when I was first here at San Jose State, compared to now, there are a lot more, you know, organizations, and I think we've learned the word of networking with others, so we aren't standing alone. So I just use that as an example, and I was going to say, as a staff member at AAPI, you know, when Alice was saying it wasn't glamorous, I remember doing bulk mailing, you know, and that was so we could save money, but you had to put these addresses by zip codes, you know, and we got a less rate. But, you know, those were the kind of things that you did because money wasn't available. So you get creative of how you can do things in that sense. So, and you'll see yourself at, you know, organizations or fundraisers, and you know, you need to continue to do your activism by attending, volunteering, you know, being there, continuing your education also. So I hope that you are all staying in tune and staying with, we keep using the word elder. I'm going to use the word seasoned people to get on board with the technology with Zoom, watches that, you know, are little microcomputers here, so you can check your email, just so that you are current and that your computer's not at home, that you can see things. Anyway, so I would just add that.
In 1974-75, the Asian American Studies program was threatened to be eliminated by President Bunzell. And so I recruited AAPI, and they came to campus with Asian American Studies program, and most of us, about 20 or 30 of us, went to the president's office to stage a sit-in of Asian Americans. And there's a picture somewhere in the Spartan Daily on that that event. But that was my first issue, combining the communities together, AAPI and Asian American Studies. And so that was a very, well, he never eliminated Asian American Studies. He didn't cut it, so it must have been effective. Also, another movement I've been involved with, I made the first apology of discrimination against Asian Americans from the state government. The state government posed a lot of discriminatory measures because I know the history of Asian Americans in the state. And so I apologize, ACR 42. That led to a host of other apologies. In fact, San Jose, City of San Jose just recently apologized for burning down 4 Chinatowns. And so the atrocities towards the Asian American community is great. And the apologies from the labor union even, the labor unions apologized for the discrimination of Asian Americans in the 1900s. And so there's a lot more apologies to be had right now for the Asian American community because the discrimination is so deep. It is so deep that we're just uncovering things now. And so that's another movement that's still going on, and you can jump on that and find out where we were discriminated in the past and how we are currently discriminated now, today. So that's all I have to say.
Michael?
You know, that's a good point. Apologies. Apologies come by because we become aware of something that went wrong. And so I think that the folks who are at San Jose State who are studying history ought to be looking at things that went awry in our past and say, there has to be make amends. The beauty of apologies is that once you start to understand what apologies do, it frees up people, it loosens up their past, it's including, and it's very healthy because this country can start to admit that it had its beginnings, and we were taught that it's glorious beginnings, but you know, it's really salt and peppered with a lot of racism and discrimination and the push for power. And I think that the more we bring these kinds of things to the surface through our studies, that the more healthy this country becomes and more healthy that future generations become, and more, for lack of a better word, more tolerant and more inclusive folks can be. Because when the Japanese Americans sued the government for an apology and reparations for being sent to camp without due process, it became a foundation for a lot of more other talks about reparations. And I think that a lot of us are going to have to start thinking about reparations for slavery. And what does that look like and what will it become? Asian Americans can be a integral and important piece in that movement. Looking at the things that happened to Latin Americans and Mexican Americans who were citizens of this country back in the 30s, who were expatriated on cattle cars back to Mexico solely because they were Mexicans or Latinos, is a violation of the civil rights. That has to be addressed. And these are the kinds of things that, you know, we have learned as Asian Americans, that these kinds of bringing up the information makes us a little bit more knowledgeable about who we are as a country and how much better we can become. And Paul mentioned the union laborers. They think that they're the progressive ones, but back in this early 1800s, they're the ones that pushed for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 on the West Coast. So understanding that shows that things can change also. But I think the point of apologies is that you have to study our own histories and figure out, what did we do to people of color? What did we do to indigenous people? What are we doing today to women and people of the LGBTQ and transgender populations? And do we tolerate that, or do we become active in pushing back and making sure that politicians who are in the power to make these decisions are either educated or eliminated, so that we can move forward on policies that make this country what it really should be?
Michael, how did Asian American issues influence your decision to run for Congress?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, but one of the things that come up is when 9/11 happened, that morning, my staff called me and said, turn on your TV if you don't have it on right now. And I turned it on and I saw one tower smoking, and then the second one being hit. But about a few minutes after that, I heard the Pentagon get hit. And then I thought, what is happening? And then the next day, the Democratic caucus, we caucused and we argued about what happened, and we knew that it was a terrorist that attacked our country. And the comments in the caucus was, we were attacked. This day will live in infamy. And I thought to myself, I've heard that phrase before, and I thought, this is why we need to be around. And a guy named Henry Waxman from LA, he's been there for years, and he just calmed the whole group down. He says, wait a minute. Let's settle down. We're not going to have a declaration of war that gives the president a blank check. And we have to be very specific in how we're going to do this. And I thought to myself, he's an argument for never having term limits, because he had the institutional memory of how to do things correctly. We, throughout that time of putting together a declaration of war, we tried to be careful in not looking like we're going to target any one group, and it came down to terrorists, going after terrorists. And it passed with one negative vote, and that was Barbara Lee. And Barbara Lee was trying to tell us that terrorism can come from almost any country. And so to declare war on terrorists, does that mean that we can wage war from any country where the terrorists come from? And the answer is yes, because there's a law that allows you to do that. And so she was right. The rest of us were not as right as she was. And so my experience was that, yeah, we want to limit it and make sure that we don't be careless about who we target. And still we could have been more accurate. Having said that, making sure that nobody gets profiled racially and that no one gets targeted because they got brown skin and facial hair or they wear a turban. And that was a very, very difficult exercise this country went through. And it's still going through it, but we really had to bear down on it. And I think that the Japanese American experience and Asian American experience that drove the issue of not targeting, not racial profiling folks became very important. And I think that were it not for that experience, we would have done a more poor job of addressing this issue of 9/11 on our own soil and being true to the Constitution. Norm Minna, being in the administration, really made sure that that cabinet, the Republican cabinet, understood that racial profiling is not going to be accepted. And it was predominantly being exercised in airports and airplanes. And he just made it very clear that racial profiling is not acceptable. And we had to keep fighting for the rights of Sikhs who were required to undo their turban in order to examine it. And we just kept pushing that there's other ways to examine that without offending their religion. And so, our experience has had a benefit if we speak up. If we speak up.
Have to be the eyes and ears. I was just going to mention, I work at De Anza College. As a reminder, all of you, once you get into your work field, that you can form staff association. so that this is another way that you feel supportive. At De Anza, we started an Asian Pacific American Staff Association that went across the campus, and it brought people together in 1990. It's still going on, and other colleges. I know that, Paul, you started one at Evergreen. But we got our first Vietnamese-speaking counselor when we talked about the, Vietnamese refugees that were coming over. Also, on a local level, at Santa Clara, our elections were strangely white, and in terms of the council members, and that had to do with looking at how elections were done by districts. And so I became part of the plaintiff team, as well as the original person was Wes Mukuyama, and there's power in numbers. But the first person I called was right here, Paul Fong, saying, Paul, you have to help us. I know you don't live in Santa Clara, but you have such a wealth of information. So knowing your resources is also important to begin that process, because you can't do it by yourself. So we did change the elections in that sense, and in 2022, that was the first election, and you saw a shift of that color change to a variety of colors as opposed to the color white. And now we're in the elections of the 2024. So that council has made some changes, but it took time. It was over 50 years since a person of color was actually elected. Thank you.
Paul, do you have something to say? Or
No, I don't have anything to say. She said it all.
okay, the 4 pillars of this project are all things that we've talked about. One is identity. Second is solidarity and allyship. Third is activism. And the fourth thing is structural and institutional racism. So this project is trying to address all of those issues. And so the last question I'd like to pose to you three is, why is Asian American advocacy still important? Or maybe another way of asking it is, why is it particularly important now?
Well, I'm involved with the issue of getting the first Vietnamese American president of a community college rehired to her position because she's a sister in the Asian American movement. And I'm going against my brothers and sisters in the labor movement to support my sister in the Asian American movement, because they're all one and the same to me. And so that has really highlighted the institutional discrimination that Vietnamese Americans are experiencing at the highest level. And so that's something that I could not pass up. I took it on, and I'm advocating for her against my labor union brothers and sisters, because she's my sister too, my Asian American sister. And so you still need to work these issues out, because they're still there. They're all there. And institutionally, structurally, solidarity-wise, fortunately, I have great solidarity with the Latinx and the African American community here, and the Asian American community as well. And so that solidarity and the labor community is intact as well. And my activism is still there. And my identity I learned here at San Jose State University. My identity through the Asian American Studies classes that I had. And so my identity was solidified. And now I'm dealing with structural and institutional racism. And so all those 4 pillars are related to one another, and they connect in my life, and so I'm trying to pursue those things.
LaDonna and Michael, any last words on this issue?
I felt that we covered activism from the very beginning of this panel. And I mentioned, for me, taking Asian American Studies, knowing my identity, knowing my history was the beginning, so that you're more aware. But you need to help that situation by telling your family and friends, because even though you're family, you could have differences politically, social, in that sense. But, we can have the conversation of, can we agree it's okay to disagree? My own mother and father were Republicans, so they were very upset when I became registered as a Democrat. But, those are the issues. I tell them, you sent me to college. It broadened my perspective. But anyway, I was going to say that being in organizations helps you continue the fight, as I mentioned, that we're all responsible. Don't think that others are doing the job. We all need to pitch in, whether it's, like I said, walking precincts or attending fundraisers or, volunteering your time. So if you are getting tired, you've been in the field a long time, then I ask you, please get 2 people that it's going to take that many or more to replace you. We need to begin the process of mentoring, because this generation, not that I'm saying you have it easy, but you are resting on the pillars of people that have gone before you. And I know I benefited from people speaking up. So we need to continue that, to be vigilant. Make noise, ask, what are our needs? Make sure. I just want to kind of add to it that, congratulations, we have our first African-American female Supreme Court justice. We need to ask, why not more? Why limit it to 9? I hate to say, when is our turn? But I don't see an API representative right now. So how are you going to fix that? So why not look at the door of opening it up to more than 9? Thank you.
Yeah, I think those 2 good points is to speak up, to be heard, and then to act on your philosophy that Paul was talking about, even if it's uncomfortable. Activism is getting out of your own comfort sections. Activism means that it's going to take practice. And practice means that, even little things, if you practice the little things that make you uncomfortable, but you have to speak up on, do it, because once the big stuff starts to come along, you shall really be tested. And if Paul is chair of the South Bay Labor Council, and he's going against labor, a section of labor, on the issue of a female Asian president in a community college, and taking a position in opposition of your friends, then that is not only activism, it's an act of courage, and sometimes it's not comfortable. And my president, Biden, I didn't vote for him the first time because I went with Andy Yang. But he said, my administration is going to look like the face of America. And I wrote a op-ed piece saying that he's made good decisions on his cabinet. He made good appointments, people who are ethically driven and who are well qualified. But my face is not in your administration yet, so does that mean I'm not part of America? And it's kind of it was an uncomfortable thing to do, but it had to be said. And prior to that, he said, I promise that my running mate will be a woman of color. Now, if you mean that that's going to be a code for a black woman, say so. I think that that's fair. But if you're just saying that as a woman of color, then consider Tammy Duckworth, a senator, double amputee, veteran, PhD, speaks 3 languages, international, and well qualified. And so, and we have to bring these things up if people say certain kinds of things so that we can be included in the conversation. And Andy Yang running for president was a breath of fresh air, and I think Asian Americans were criticizing him sometimes for what they perceived as a misstep in terms of terminologies, but we should be out there supporting and trying to give him encouragement and advice without having to go public and putting our dirty laundry out there at this moment. Now, if we had 5 or 6 presidents in the past, we get a bunch of Asian Americans on the cabinet, being more public about it, I guess, wouldn't be that bad. But we're still trying to get into first base. And here's the reason why I feel strongly about it, because if Obama didn't become president, our comfort level looking at African Americans on TV would be a lot less. But because he was president, he was able to make everybody globally more comfortable in leadership positions and in the media. And so I think that when we're faced with that issue of supporting each other, we should do that knowing that that person is going to be competent. And, you know, with the media, it's great that Daniel Day Kim is more out front and he's doing the things, putting more stuff out in the media, because it raises the level of our presence in the media. So activism is getting out of your comfort level, and you have to practice at it. And that's the only way we're going to have any movement for Asian Americans in this country to be part of the leadership and part of the scene. And with absent that, it's not going to happen. And in this valley, we're lucky because we have in this room a whole bunch of folks that took the time to be uncomfortable.
And speaking about the people in this room, I think let's spend the last couple of minutes entertaining any questions that you might have of the whole panel or of any one member of the panel. So are there any questions that you have?
Let's not be Asian now. You all got something in your mind, articulate it. No such thing as an embarrassing question.
No, we did a great job.
Yeah.
So Mike, Paul, Donna, and Alice, you have just conducted a huge session of oral history of Asian American activism, and it's tremendous. It's tremendous. We all have it. You know, I mean, it's you gave it to us. You're sharing it, and we'll just have to move it forward. And I just wanted to say one thing. AAPI is sponsoring a contest for school children from, I guess, kindergarten to high school, and it's Growing Up Asian. And so there's going to be essays and, you know, artwork and videos done by children. It's a contest, but this is an encouragement of children telling their stories and beginning oral history at a very young age. So anyway, you're inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Anyone else? All right. Well, I think our panelists can linger a little bit afterwards as well if you're, you know, a little on the shyer side and would like to approach them on a one-on-one basis. So, as a reminder, I have packed up some food in the back. I think we're all out of to-go boxes, especially students. Feed your friends, feed your family. If you have enough arms and hands to take it to some unhoused folks locally as well, please feel free to do so. I hate to see food go to waste. You know, I don't think that's cultural. I think that's just human for me. But anyhow, I also want to plug a few things. I think our newly elected AS president, Nina, was here earlier, but now she's in class. Poor thing has a Friday afternoon class. Whoa. Anyhow, and so we had an event on Tuesday it was called Reckoning Our Past, Engaging the Present, Facing Our Future, Recognizing San Jose State's Role in Anti-Asian Racism and the Internment of Japanese Americans. So we have a virtual exhibit available, so you can scan the QR code there. There's also a link up on the top. And so, you know, with our esteemed panelists and also moderator, I think we have a lot of connections with our local university here at San Jose State. But one of the things that I think it's important for us to do is also recognize how San Jose State has also perpetuated institutional and structural racism as well, not just in the past, but also continues to do so as well. So I think that's one step in doing so. And we, Nina and I were in the archives at our library, and we dug up these materials there. So if any students are interested in that too, happy to also go with you. All right. And then also a plug for our AAPI Heritage Month. Here at San Jose State, we celebrate AAPI Heritage Month in the month of April, because usually May is a little bit busy for us all, right? Because with finals and everything like that. So please feel free to take a look at the various events that are ongoing. And I'm sure for past events there are also recordings, perhaps, of some of them. Please check in with Chris at the Mosaic Cross-Cultural Center for more information. Let's see. Also, we have a new APITA Center director. There's no actual physical space yet, so we still have to fight, right? Like we have one person, but that's one person, okay? But when the center does manifest into a physical space, we would like your help naming the center. As Alice talked about earlier, perhaps alphabet soup is not the greatest way to name something, but we want to solicit your curiosity, your creativity in helping name the new center. Also, something that Diana and I helped create the first one of, right? Was it the first one? Was it 2 years ago, pre-COVID? Seems like ages ago. But the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American End of the Year celebration, we never had one before for our APITA students. And so we will be honoring our APITA students on Thursday, May 12th from 6 to 7:30 in this very space. I believe there's going to be stoles and those kinds of things, and also some speakers as well, and food. So I should like to plug that. Yes, it's a tradition now. Now it's going to happen every year. And so let me just go back a few slides. I want to, again, thank you so much for our moderator, Alice Kawazoe. Woo! Oh, yes, Vicki. Oh, yes. Oh, it's virtual. Oh, yes, we're going to get it printed. There's a delay with the printers. I'll let you know. Okay. All right, so thank you, Alice, for engaging us in this conversation, very, smoothly navigating all of these different tendrils and threads into our larger conversation.
Well, these panelists are really difficult to deal with, so really stressed me.
Well, you're the professional here. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, LaDonna, and thank you, Mike. And might I add, I'm just saying for our students in the crowd, these are alumni, right? And so hopefully one day in the future, you'll be up here as well, sharing your stories and sharing your oral histories about the differences that you've carved out in our community and the things that you've done in our community. All right, and so with that, please don't forget to take some food. Please, 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 if you don't have all the hands, put it outside, come back for it or something like that. Please take the food. All right? Okay, and then again, as Vicki said, for this exhibit, currently it's a virtual exhibit, so it's on a website, but the documents will be printed and housed in the AS House, which is near the ATMs. Where is that? 10th and San Fernando-ish, between San Fernando and San Antonio, if I know my downtown San Jose geography. All right. And that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
We've known each other for 67 years. Since freshman in high school. I remember you standing in the school door. Was it on 10th Avenue? Never knowing that Edward